Zara's bare feet slapped against the cold metal floor as she ran through the maintenance tunnels of Station Omega 7. Behind her, the harsh clicking of Vorthak pursuit drones echoed off the narrow walls. Her lungs burned, but she couldn't stop. Not when freedom was so close she could taste it. The young Zalani female had been planning this escape for months. Every day spent scrubbing floors and hauling cargo had been another opportunity to map the station's layout, to identify weak points in the security grid. The Vorthak Empire believed their slaves were too broken to resist, too afraid to dream of anything beyond servitude. They were wrong about Zara. She ducked under a cluster of cooling pipes and pressed herself against the wall as a patrol swept past the access hatch above. The blue-scaled Vorthak guards moved with practiced efficiency, their energy rifles crackling with barely contained power. Zara waited until their footsteps faded before continuing her desperate flight toward the docking bay. The maintenance shaft opened into a storage compartment filled with shipping containers. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the vast expanse of the docking bay beyond. Dozens of ships sat in their berths like sleeping giants. Vorthak cruisers with their distinctive curved hulls. Merchant vessels from 100 different worlds, and there, in Bay 17, something she had never seen before. The ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Vorthak battlecruiser. Its hull was a matte gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange angular protrusions jutted from its surface, and weapons ports lined its flanks, like the eyes of some primordial beast. Most unsettling of all, it bore no markings she recognized. No imperial crests. No trading guild symbols. Nothing. Zara had overheard the dock workers talking in hushed tones about the mysterious vessel. They called it a human ship, though she had never heard of such a species. The Vorthak had conquered every known civilization in this sector of the galaxy. What manner of beings could have built something so imposing that even the Empire treated them with cautious respect? An explosion somewhere in the station's upper levels sent vibrations through the deck plating. Emergency klaxons began wailing, and automated announcements in the Vorthak language echoed through the corridors. They had discovered her escape. Soon, every guard on the station would be hunting for her. Moving quickly but carefully, Zara slipped from the storage compartment into the docking bay proper. The artificial gravity was lighter here, designed to accommodate the various species that frequented the station. She used this to her advantage, taking long, bounding steps that covered ground quickly while keeping her profile low. The human ship loomed larger as she approached, its hull rising like a metal cliff face above her head. Up close, she could see that what she had taken for decorative elements were actually sophisticated sensor arrays and defensive systems. This was not merely a transport or trader. This was a vessel built for war. A boarding ramp extended from the ship's belly, touching down on the docking bay floor with barely a whisper of sound. The technology was unlike anything in the Vorthak arsenal. Their ships landed with thunderous crashes and billowing clouds of exhaust. This craft seemed to defy such crude necessities. Zara hesitated at the foot of the ramp. She was about to board an alien vessel belonging to a species she knew nothing about. For all she knew, the humans might be even worse than the Vorthak. But as the sound of approaching boots echoed from the access corridors, she realized she had no choice. Slavery under the Vorthak was a certainty. Whatever lay aboard this ship was at least unknown. She ran up the ramp just as the first Vorthak guards emerged into the docking bay. Shouts rang out behind her as they spotted her fleeing form, but she was already through the airlock and into the ship's interior. The corridor beyond was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were smooth and seamless, lit by strips of soft white light that seemed to emanate from the metal itself. The air was clean and warm, carrying scents she couldn't identify. Most remarkably, everything was sized for beings roughly her own height. After years on Vorthak stations where even the shortest doorways required her to stretch, it was disconcerting to find herself in a space built to more familiar proportions. Emergency lighting began flashing red as the ship's systems detected unauthorized entry. Zara expected alarms, shouting, the thunder of boots as security forces converged on her position. Instead, she heard something that made her freeze in bewilderment. Laughter. It was a warm, rich sound, completely at odds with the dire nature of her situation. Following the sound, She found herself at the entrance to what appeared to be the ship's bridge. The chamber was spacious and well lit, with workstations arranged in a logical pattern around a central command area. And standing at the center of it all was the most unusual being she had ever encountered. The human was tall, perhaps a head taller than herself, with skin the color of burnished copper and dark hair streaked with silver. Unlike the Vorthak with their reptilian features or the insectoid Skrell, this being looked remarkably similar to her own species. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head positioned atop the torso. The similarities were unsettling and somehow comforting at the same time, but it was the human's expression that truly caught her off guard. Where she expected hostility or suspicion, she found only amused curiosity. The being's mouth was curved in what she recognized as a smile, though the gesture seemed genuine rather than predatory. "Well, this is unexpected," the human said, speaking in accented but clearly understandable galactic standard. "We don't often have stowaways, especially not ones being chased by half the station's security force." Other humans moved about the bridge with calm efficiency, their attention divided between their duties and the unfolding drama. None seemed alarmed by her presence, which was perhaps the most alien thing of all. In her experience, unexpected visitors were met with violence first and questions later. "Please," Zara gasped, still struggling to catch her breath. "I need sanctuary. The Vorthak will kill me if they find me." The human captain stepped closer, and she saw that his eyes were a startling shade of blue, like the seas of her homeworld before the Vorthak poisoned them. "Kill you? That seems excessive, even for them. What exactly did you do?" I escaped," she said simply. Something shifted in the captain's expression. The amusement faded, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "Escaped from what?" "The slave pens. I've been their property for 6 years." The bridge fell silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. Zara could feel the weight of the human's attention settling on her like a physical thing. When the captain spoke again, his voice carried an edge that made her shiver. "Slavery." He said the word like it left a bitter taste in his mouth. "I see. And how exactly does one become property of the Vorthak Empire?" Zara's throat tightened as memories she preferred to keep buried fought their way to the surface. "They came to my world when I was 16. Said we owed them tribute for the privilege of existing in their space. When my people couldn't pay, they took what they wanted instead. And what they wanted was people. The young ones, mostly. We're easier to break," they said. "More adaptable." The captain turned away from her, and she caught a glimpse of his reflection in one of the darkened displays. His expression was terrifying in its controlled fury. When he spoke, it was not to her but to one of his crew members. "Martinez, what's our current diplomatic status with the Vorthak Empire?" A younger human looked up from her console. "We have a non-aggression pact, sir. Trade agreements in sectors 7 through 12. They've been pushing for expanded access to our shipping lanes." "Interesting." The captain's voice was deceptively calm. "And what's the Empire's official position on slavery?" "They claim it doesn't exist," Martinez replied. "According to their representatives, they operate a voluntary labor exchange program for the economic benefit of underdeveloped worlds." "Of course they do." The captain turned back to Zara. "What's your name?" "Zara." "Well, Zara, it seems you've put us in something of a diplomatic predicament. Technically speaking, harboring escaped property of a sovereign government could be seen as an act of aggression." Her heart sank. Of course, it was too much to hope for. Even if the humans seemed different from the other species she had encountered, they were still bound by the same political realities. The Vorthak Empire was too powerful to antagonize over the fate of a single slave. But then, the captain smiled, and it was nothing like the cold expressions she had learned to fear. This smile promised violence, but not directed at her. "Fortunately for you, the Human Federation has some very strong opinions about slavery. Opinions that supersede any diplomatic considerations." He raised his voice, addressing the bridge crew. "All hands, prepare for immediate departure. Navigation, Plot a course for the edge of Vorthak space. Communications. Transmit the following message to Station Omega-7. The Human Federation vessel Terra's Fury acknowledges receipt of one political refugee seeking asylum. Any attempt to interfere with our departure will be considered an act of war. Zara stared at him in shock. You're really going to help me? Help you? The captain's expression grew thoughtful. My dear girl, you've done us a tremendous favor. We've been looking for an excuse to send the Vorthak a message about their labor exchange program. You've just given us one. The ship vibrated slightly as its engines came online. Through the bridge's main viewport, Zara could see Vorthak security forces gathering around the docking berth. Energy weapons were being brought to bear on the ship's hull, though she suspected they would have little effect on the massive vessel's armor. Captain, one of the crew members called out, we're receiving a transmission from Station Command. They're demanding we return their property and submit to boarding. Tell them that property doesn't run away, the captain replied, and that any attempt to board this vessel will result in them becoming intimately acquainted with our point defense systems. As Terra's Fury lifted off from the docking bay, Zara watched through the viewport as the station fell away below them. For the first time in 6 years, she was free. More than that, she was among people who seemed to understand that some things were worth fighting for. The human captain appeared beside her, following her gaze to the receding station. I should probably mention that things might get a bit complicated from here on out. The Vorthak don't like being told no, and they really don't like losing face. They'll probably try to stop us before we reach the border. What will happen then? The captain's smile returned, and Zara realized it was the expression of a predator who had just sighted prey. Then they'll discover why humanity doesn't negotiate with slavers. As if summoned by his words, warning alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The tactical display lit up with dozens of red contacts converging on their position. Vorthak patrol, craft and corvettes, moving to intercept them before they could escape to neutral space. Shields up, the captain ordered calmly. Weapons hot. All hands to battle stations. Zara watched in fascination as the humans transformed from casual observers to efficient warriors in the span of seconds. There was no panic. No confusion. Each crew member moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before and emerged victorious. Don't worry, the captain told her, as the first enemy missiles appeared on the display. This won't take long. And looking at the grim determination on the faces around her, Zara found herself believing him. These humans were unlike any species she had encountered. They didn't just fight when cornered or threatened. They fought for principles, for ideas that meant more to them than their own safety. The Vorthak were about to learn what happened when they threatened something humanity held sacred, and Zara had a front-row seat to watch it unfold. The first Vorthak missiles struck Terra's Fury's shields like raindrops against a mountain. Zara watched in amazement as the energy barriers absorbed the impacts without so much as a flicker. The human ship didn't even slow down. Interesting, Captain Morrison said, studying the tactical display with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Their weapons seemed to be calibrated for standard galactic defensive systems. Martinez, what's our shield status? Holding at 97%, sir. The communications officer replied. At this rate, they could fire for 3 days straight without making a dent. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Well, that's good to know. Helm, maintain course, and speed. Let's see what else they have in their arsenal before we start shooting back. Zara couldn't believe what she was hearing. The humans were treating this like a training exercise, rather than a life-or-death battle. Around them, more Vorthak ships were converging, their weapons blazing away at the seemingly invulnerable human vessel. Energy beams that could slice through the hull of a cruiser scattered harmlessly off Terra's Fury's shields. Captain, the tactical officer called out, we're detecting larger vessels moving to intercept. 3 heavy cruisers, and what looks like a dreadnought. Now we're talking, Morrison said with genuine pleasure. How long until they're in weapons range? 17 minutes at current speed. Perfect. That should give us enough time for our guest to see what makes the Vorthak such charming hosts. Zara looked at him in confusion. I don't understand. Morrison gestured to one of the auxiliary displays. Computer? Show our passenger the standard Vorthak battle doctrine. The screen lit up with what appeared to be archived footage from previous encounters. Zara watched in growing horror as Vorthak fleets systematically destroyed civilian transports, bombarded defenseless colonies, and hunted down escape pods like sport. In every case, the Empire's forces showed no mercy to the weak or helpless. "This is what your former masters do when they think no one's watching," Morrison said quietly. "They're not just slavers, Zara. They're bullies on a galactic scale. They pick on species that can't fight back and pretend it's for the greater good." One clip showed Vorthak soldiers herding civilians into transport ships. Zara recognized the scene immediately. It was from her own homeworld's conquest. She saw herself as a terrified 16-year-old being dragged from her family's home. "How do you have this footage?" she whispered. "We've been watching them for years," Morrison replied. "Gathering evidence. Building a case. The problem with the galactic community is that everyone's afraid to be the first one to stand up to a bully. They think if they keep their heads down and don't make waves, they'll be left alone. But you're different. Humanity learned a long time ago that bullies only understand one language." Morrison's expression hardened. "We spent centuries fighting wars among ourselves, learning every possible way to kill and destroy. When we finally made it to the stars, we thought we'd left all that behind. We wanted to be explorers, traders, diplomats." The tactical display updated as more Vorthak ships joined the pursuit. Nearly 50 vessels now, with more arriving every minute. "But then we started meeting species like yours," Morrison continued. "Good people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. And we found out that there were things in the galaxy much worse than human nature. The Vorthak Empire is one of them." A new alarm sounded as the lead Vorthak cruiser fired what appeared to be a much more powerful weapon. The beam struck Terra's Fury's rear shields and actually managed to cause a brief fluctuation in the energy barrier. "Now that's more like it," Morrison said approvingly. "What do you make it, Chen?" The tactical officer ran quick calculations. "Heavy plasma lance, sir. About 15% more powerful than their standard weapons. Still, not enough to break through our shields. But it might actually require us to pay attention." "Should we return fire, Captain?" asked the weapons officer. Morrison considered this for a moment. "Not yet. I want to see their full capability before we show them ours. Besides, our passenger deserves to understand exactly what she's escaped from." As if on cue, the Vorthak formation split into attack groups, attempting to surround the human ship. Their coordination was impressive. Zara had to admit. The Empire's forces were disciplined and well-trained. Against any other species, such a show of force would have been overwhelming, but the humans seemed utterly unimpressed. "Standard hunting pack formation," observed Martinez. "They're trying to overwhelm us with concentrated fire from multiple vectors. Classic bully tactics," Morrison agreed. "When intimidation fails, they resort to ganging up on their target." "Chen, are we recording all of this?" "Every shot, sir. Full spectrum analysis of their weapons, tactics, and ship capabilities." Morrison turned to Zara with what might have been an apologetic expression. "I hope you don't mind, but your escape is providing us with an excellent opportunity to field test their military doctrine. We've never had a chance to see them in action against a peer opponent." "Peer opponent?" Zara stared at him. "Captain, there are nearly 60 ships out there. This is just one vessel." "True," Morrison acknowledged. "Which is why this is such a valuable test. If we can't handle one Vorthak task force with a single ship, we'll need to reconsider our strategic planning." The dreadnought had finally moved into position, its massive bulk dwarfing even the human vessel. Weapon ports along its hull began to glow as it charged its primary armament. "Now that's impressive," Morrison said with genuine admiration. "Computer. Full analysis of that weapon system." "Scanning." The ship's AI replied in a pleasant voice. "Analysis complete. The weapon appears to be a focused antimatter beam with yield equivalent to approximately 12 megatons. 12 megatons, Morrison mused. That could actually hurt if it hit something important. Helm. Evasive maneuvers. Let's see how maneuverable they think we are. Terra's Fury suddenly changed course, accelerating at an angle that should have been impossible for something of its size. Zara felt herself pressed back into her seat. As the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate, the massive ship moved like a fighter craft, dancing between the incoming fire with impossible grace. How? Zara gasped. Human engineering, Morrison replied proudly. We may not be the oldest species in the galaxy, but we're very good at making things that shouldn't work according to conventional physics. The dreadnought fired its main weapon, and a beam of pure annihilation lanced through the space Terra's Fury had occupied just moments before. The energy discharge was so intense it left a brief afterimage on the visual displays. Missed, Chen reported unnecessarily. Yes, but only just, Morrison noted. That weapon could actually damage us, if they managed to hit us. Good to know. Weapons. Target the dreadnought's main gun. Let's see how they react when someone shoots back. This was the moment Zara had been waiting for. After watching the humans calmly endure everything the Vorthak could throw at them, she was finally going to see what their ship could do in return. The answer exceeded her wildest expectations. Terra's Fury's response was not the massive energy beams or missile barrages she had come to expect from space combat. Instead, something much smaller and faster launched from the ship's hull. It looked like a simple metal rod, barely visible on the display. The projectile struck the dreadnought's forward section at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The result was spectacular. The kinetic energy release tore through the massive ship's armor like paper, venting atmosphere and debris into space. Secondary explosions rippled along the hull as internal systems overloaded and failed. In a matter of seconds, the pride of the Vorthak fleet was reduced to a drifting hulk. The entire enemy formation seemed to pause in shock. Weapons fire ceased as the Vorthak commanders tried to process what had just happened. Kinetic projectile, Morrison explained to the stunned Zara. No exotic particles, no antimatter, no energy fields, just a very dense piece of metal moving very, very fast. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. You destroyed their dreadnought with a single shot. We disabled it, Morrison corrected. There are probably survivors aboard. We'll transmit their location to the nearest rescue services once this is over. Over? Zara looked at the tactical display, which still showed nearly 60 enemy ships. But they still outnumber you. Morrison's smile was predatory. Numbers aren't everything in warfare, Zara. Watch and learn. The human ship suddenly accelerated toward the enemy formation at a speed that defied belief. Instead of retreating from the superior force, Terra's Fury was charging directly into their midst. All weapons free, Morrison commanded. Let's show them how humans fight. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a master class in applied violence. Terra's Fury tore through the Vorthak formation like a shark through a school of fish. Its weapons systems engaged targets with mechanical precision, each shot calculated for maximum effect with minimum waste. Vorthak cruisers found their shields overwhelmed by weapons that seemed to ignore conventional defensive measures. Corvettes were swatted from space by point defense systems that tracked a dozen targets simultaneously. Fighters that attempted to swarm the human ship discovered that its hull was covered with automated turrets that could engage anything within a significant radius. But it was the tactical doctrine that truly set the humans apart. Where other species would have tried to minimize losses and fight conservatively, the humans embraced calculated aggression. They didn't just defeat their enemies. They dominated them so thoroughly that resistance became pointless. Engines on that cruiser, Morrison called out, identifying a target. We want them alive, but immobilized. Another kinetic projectile lanced out, striking the Vorthak vessel's drive section with surgical precision. The ship tumbled out of formation, its propulsion systems destroyed but its crew compartments intact. Next target, weapons systems only. The pattern repeated across the battlefield. The humans didn't destroy their enemies so much as methodically dismantle them, leaving behind a debris field of disabled but largely intact vessels. It was a demonstration of power that went beyond mere military superiority. Why aren't you killing them? Zara asked, still struggling to process what she was witnessing. Because, Morrison replied. never taking his eyes off the tactical display. "We're not the bad guys in this story. These soldiers are following orders from people who think slavery is an acceptable business practice. The soldiers themselves might be decent beings who just haven't thought too hard about what they're defending." Another Vorthak ship fell to the human onslaught, its crew rescued by automated systems that deployed the moment their vessel was disabled. "Besides," Morrison continued, "there's something to be said for leaving survivors. They'll go back to their superiors and report what happened here today. Word will spread through the fleet about what human ships are capable of. Fear is a much more effective deterrent than death when you're trying to change minds." The last of the enemy vessels surrendered when it became clear that resistance was futile. Terra's Fury had faced down 60 ships and emerged without so much as a scratch on its hull. The entire engagement had lasted less than an hour. "Helm, resume course for the border," Morrison ordered. "Communications. Transmit medical assistance coordinates to all disabled vessels. Make sure they know help is on the way." He turned to Zara, who was still staring at the tactical display in shock. "And that, my dear, is why the Vorthak Empire is about to have a very bad day. They've been so used to picking on defenseless species that they've forgotten what a real fight looks like." "What happens now?" Zara asked. Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. "Now, we take you somewhere safe and start making some calls. The Human Federation has been looking for a reason to intervene in this sector. Thanks to your testimony and this little demonstration, I think we just found one." As Terra's Fury crossed into neutral space, Zara realized that her escape had been more than just a personal bid for freedom. She had sparked something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy, and the Vorthak Empire was about to discover that humanity had some very strong opinions about slavery. 3 months after Zara's escape, the Vorthak High Command received an unexpected visitor. The human delegation arrived at the Imperial capital aboard a ship that made Terra's Fury look like a patrol craft. The vessel identified itself as Freedom's Light, and its very presence in Vorthak space sent shockwaves through the Empire's leadership. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stepped off the diplomatic transport with the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. Behind her walked an escort of human marines whose mere presence seemed to unnerve the heavily armed Vorthak honor guard. The humans weren't trying to intimidate anyone. They simply radiated the quiet competence of people who had never met a problem they couldn't solve, with sufficient application of force and ingenuity. "Welcome to Vorthak Prime," High Chancellor Krex said through the universal translator, his ceremonial scales polished to a gleaming sheen. "The Empire is honored by your presence." Ambassador Vasquez smiled pleasantly. "Thank you, Chancellor. I trust you received our preliminary communications regarding the purpose of our visit?" The Chancellor's tail twitched nervously. He had indeed received their communications, and each one had made him sleep a little less soundly. The humans were requesting clarification on the Empire's labor policies, specifically regarding the status of what they termed involuntary workforce participants from recently integrated systems. "Of course," Krex replied carefully, "though I confess some confusion about the terminology. The Empire operates a voluntary labor exchange program designed to foster economic development in underdeveloped regions." "I see," Vasquez said, her tone remaining perfectly diplomatic. "Perhaps we could discuss the specifics of this program? I'm particularly interested in the voluntary aspects of your labor exchanges." The meeting moved to the Chancellor's private office, a vast chamber decorated with trophies from conquered worlds. Vasquez noticed several artifacts that she recognized from intelligence briefings. A ceremonial sword from the Kalani homeworld, displayed beside a hologram of the planet's capitulation ceremony. Artwork from the Nexus colonies, removed during their integration into the Empire. Each piece told a story of conquest disguised as cooperation. "Tea?" Krex offered, gesturing to an ornate service set. "Thank you," Vasquez replied, accepting the cup while her aide discreetly scanned the contents. Not that she expected poison. The Vorthak were many things, but they weren't stupid enough to assassinate a human diplomat. "Now then," the Chancellor began, settling his bulk into a chair sized for his larger frame, "about these concerns regarding our labor policies." "Let me save us both some time," Vasquez interrupted gently. 3 months ago, A young Zalani female named Zara escaped from one of your facilities and sought asylum aboard a human vessel. During her debriefing, she provided us with some very interesting information about the Empire's methods of recruitment. Krexith's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of stress that Vasquez had been briefed to watch for. I'm sure there has been some misunderstanding. The individual you mention was likely confused or misinformed about the nature of her employment. Vasquez reached into her briefcase and withdrew a datapad. According to her testimony, she was taken from her homeworld at the age of 16 during what you call an integration process. Her family was unable to meet the tribute demands imposed by the Empire, so she was collected as what your records describe as human capital settlement. The integration process is a carefully regulated procedure designed to bring developing worlds into the galactic economy, Krexth said, his voice taking on the practiced tone of someone reciting official policy. When monetary tribute cannot be provided, alternative arrangements are made for the mutual benefit of all parties. Mutual benefit, Vasquez repeated thoughtfully. Tell me, Chancellor, how exactly does a 16-year-old girl benefit from being separated from her family and forced into unpaid labor? She receives housing, nutrition, and valuable work experience that will serve her well throughout her life. Vasquez consulted her datapad again. According to our records, the average lifespan of beings in your voluntary labor program is approximately 7 years shorter than their species' normal life expectancy. The housing you mentioned consists of dormitories housing 50 individuals in spaces designed for 10. The nutrition amounts to subsistence rations, calculated to maintain basic functionality while minimizing costs. The Chancellor's tail was now lashing back and forth with barely concealed agitation. Where exactly are you obtaining these figures? We've been conducting a comprehensive study of your labor policies for the past 18 months, Vasquez replied calmly. It's amazing what you can learn when you start asking the right questions. For instance, did you know that 63% of your voluntary participants were minors when they entered the program? She turned the datapad toward him, displaying a holographic chart that made Krex's scales go pale. These are integration records from 47 different systems over the past decade. Notice the pattern? You consistently target families with children, impose tribute demands that are impossible to meet, then collect the children as payment. This is absurd, Krext protested. The Empire would never engage in the systematic exploitation of sentient beings. Wouldn't you? Vasquez stood and walked to the wall of trophies, examining a crystal sculpture from the Andarian Commonwealth. This piece is beautiful. Andarian crystal work is considered among the finest in the galaxy. Tell me, how many Andarian children are currently enrolled in your voluntary labor program? The silence stretched uncomfortably long before Krext answered. I don't have those figures immediately available. I do, Vasquez said softly. 8,467. The youngest is 12 years old. The oldest is 19. Funny thing about the Andarians, though, they're all incredibly skilled artisans, perfect for the kind of intricate work that can't be automated. She turned back to face the Chancellor. The Empire has built its economy on slavery, Chancellor. You've just been very careful about the language you use to describe it. Krext drew himself up to his full impressive height. Even if your accusations had merit, which they do not, what exactly do you propose to do about it? The Empire has sovereign authority over its internal affairs. Ambassador Vasquez smiled, and Krext suddenly understood why the human delegates made him so nervous. It was the same expression he had seen on the face of every successful predator. I'm so glad you asked, she said, returning to her seat. The Human Federation has decided to take a more active role in galactic affairs, starting with the immediate cessation of your voluntary labor program. Impossible. The Empire will never submit to external interference in its domestic policies. Oh, but you will, Vasquez assured him, because the alternative is much worse. She activated another display on her datapad, showing a star map of the local sector. Red indicators marked the locations of human fleet units, and Krext felt his blood turn cold as he realized the implications. Over the past 3 months, the Human Federation has deployed significant naval assets throughout this region. We've also established mutual defense pacts with 17 systems that you've marked for future integration. Any attempt to expand your labor recruitment efforts will be met with immediate military intervention. You're threatening war over a policy disagreement? War? Vasquez looked genuinely surprised. Chancellor, I think you misunderstand our position. We're not threatening anything. We're simply informing you that the age of easy conquest is over. She stood and walked to the window, which offered a magnificent view of the imperial capital. Thousands of beings moved through the streets below, representing dozens of species from across the empire. Many wore the distinctive gray uniforms that marked them as voluntary labor participants. You see, humanity has some experience with empires that sustain themselves through forced labor, Vasquez continued. We've fought several wars to end such practices on our own world. We're quite good at it. The Empire has military assets throughout this sector, Krext warned. You cannot simply dictate terms to a sovereign power, can't we? Vasquez pulled up another display showing the aftermath of Terra's Fury's engagement with the Vorthak task force. The images of disabled ships and rescued crews told a story of overwhelming tactical superiority. Your fleet commanders have filed some very interesting reports about human military capabilities. I believe the phrase technological disparity appears frequently. She turned back to him with that unsettling smile. But we're not here to conquer anyone, Chancellor. We're here to offer you a choice. What kind of choice? Vasquez returned to her chair and leaned forward slightly. The Human Federation is prepared to offer the Vorthak Empire a comprehensive economic development package, low-interest loans, technology transfers, preferential trading arrangements. We can help you build an economy based on voluntary participation rather than forced labor. And in exchange, immediate release of all current voluntary labor participants. Reparations to their homeworlds. A formal apology from the Empire acknowledging past wrongs, and a binding agreement to never again engage in the enslavement of sentient beings. Krext was quiet for a long time, his mind racing through the implications. The Empire's entire economic structure was built around cheap labor extracted from conquered populations. Removing that foundation would require fundamental changes to how they operated. And if we refuse your generous offer? Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Then the Human Federation will begin what we call a comprehensive economic intervention. We'll blockade your shipping lanes, sanction any nation that trades with you, and provide military support to any system seeking independence from imperial rule. She paused to let that sink in before delivering the final blow. We'll also begin actively recruiting your voluntary labor participants. Every human ship will be equipped to provide immediate asylum to any being claiming to be held against their will. And as you've seen, our ships are quite difficult to stop once they've made up their minds about something. The Chancellor's scales had gone completely pale. You're talking about the systematic dismantling of our civilization. No, Vasquez replied firmly. I'm talking about the systematic dismantling of your civilization's dependence on human suffering. The Vorthak people are capable of great things, Chancellor. Your architecture, your music, your philosophical traditions, they're remarkable achievements. You don't need slavery to build a successful society. She stood and gathered her things. I'll give you 72 hours to consider our proposal. After that, we begin implementing alternative measures. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Krext made one last attempt to salvage his position. What makes you think you have the right to impose your values on the galaxy? Ambassador Vasquez paused at the door and looked back at him with an expression of mild surprise. Right? Right? She seemed to consider the question carefully. I suppose it comes down to a simple principle, Chancellor. When someone is being hurt, you help them if you can. When someone is doing the hurting, you stop them if you're able. She smiled one last time. Humanity is very able, Chancellor. I suggest you keep that in mind while you're making your decision. As the human ship departed Vorthak space, Chancellor Krext stood at his window, watching it disappear into the void. Behind him, urgent communications were pouring in from across the Empire, reports of human ships appearing in systems throughout their territory, not attacking or threatening, but simply making their presence known. The message was clear. The age of easy conquest was indeed over. 71 hours later, the Vorthak Empire formally announced the immediate cessation of its voluntary labor program and the beginning of what it termed a humanitarian reconstruction initiative. Within 6 months, over 2 million beings had been freed from imperial facilities and returned to their homeworlds with full reparations. Zara was among the first to be repatriated, traveling aboard a human transport ship to her homeworld of Zelon. As she stood on the surface of her planet for the first time in 6 years, breathing air that smelled of the ocean and home, she thought about the strange chain of events that had brought her to this moment. Her escape had been an act of desperation, a single person's refusal to accept an intolerable situation. But it had sparked something larger than she ever could have imagined. It had given humanity the excuse they needed to act on principles they held sacred. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Zara was looking forward to seeing what came next.